All right, I'm on a roll. Here we are, going to talk about motivation hygiene theory. It's in your book, so I'm going to assume that you've read that before you watch this. So the thing about motivation hygiene theory, it's got great lessons to it. I kind of already discussed intrinsic and extrinsic value of something when I talked about the dollar bill example from Bill Gardner, the little story I made up. But I want to ask you an applied question about this, kind of a life question. It'll apply to you in your own life, I think, if you want it to, if you allow it to. And also it applies when you think about others that you'll be working with or working for you or that you're working for at work. Mainly, there are people that I think work in conditions, jobs, which most of us would characterize, and they would probably characterize as lacking hygiene factors. Those recall are those extrinsic things like basic working conditions and tools and training and the basic functional things we need to do our job well. A seat to sit in and be comfortable, climate control, adequate lighting, those kinds of things. I'm a real YouTuber, adequate lighting. But they don't have enough of those, but they're very motivated in their work. So they obviously have motivating factors by virtue of the fact that they're highly motivated. Who are these people? Well, there's some categories that stick out to me. Maybe you could think of some more. I think of police who work kind of in the inner city, the hood, the rough place where there's lots of drugs and crime, particularly in areas that are poor, like the cities are poor, so they can't fund the police force adequately. They're basically going out in an old car, that's not maintained adequately, and old equipment, old firearms, and understaffed. So they have to go on calls alone. They can't wait for backup. They have to go into domestic dispute alone, which is dangerous. But they do it, and they're motivated. They feel like they're serving fellow citizens and doing something they can be really proud of, and they should be, I think. School teachers in the inner city, where the children who come to school have to go through metal detectors because of gun violence and weapon violence. And the children come unprepared, not having studied because they don't have the social support structure at home with their parenting by and large part. They don't have a book for every student because they don't have the funding for it. They're understaffed in terms of teachers because they don't pay well. So they're missing all these hygiene factors, yet they're passionately vested in the well-being of these children, so much so that they're willing to work in an environment that's lacking all these hygiene factors, and yet they're highly motivated, really, really ready and willing, much more so than a lot of teachers who have lots of resources. Missionaries who work in a third world country, maybe there's violence or maybe there's a repulsion against Christianity or whatever their religion is as they go out and do that work, where they're rejected more than they're accepted. They're working against the tide constantly, with waves breaking over them, having to just sort of dig in. But they just seem to be happy doing it. They're serving their God, and they're doing it with great joy in their hearts. So my question is this. If I asked you, you have a choice in your life. There are two paths you can take. The path to your left is one where you'll have all these hygiene factors present. You'll have comfortable working environment. You'll have adequate pay, reasonable. All these things will be there, all the comforts that we go to expect. You'll be tooled well. You'll have the training to do your job. You'll have the tools to do your job. And you will find a mediocre level of satisfaction in your working life, which you will enjoy from the time you start working until the time that you're in your 60s. So most all of your life. You'll spend most all of your days at that job with good hygiene factors. Everything's taken care of, but not highly motivated. Not highly. Not really loving what you do. Or the path to the right is one where you'll experience some really hard knocks. You won't have the resources, you won't have the pay, you won't have the comforts. In fact, you'll have some discomforts in doing that work. But you'll spend your life pursuing something that you find is so meaningful that in spite of the fact that you don't have those comforts, those hygiene factors, those things that we all grow to just expect in our workplace, that you'll do it with pleasure. Which life do you choose? I think it's a really almost a trick question, because the moral answer is, the one that we all want to be able to give is, well, I'll go where there's satisfaction, where I'm going to make a difference in my life. You're talking about my entire life here. What is my life worth? It's worth meaning, not comforts. But the reality is that we're all compelled toward the career paths and the jobs that have those hygiene factors. In fact, we look for more than hygiene factors. We look for acclaim and praise and notoriety and high levels of success and so forth. And I just think it's a very good exercise to think to yourself about your career plans and how I use the term morally worthy in talking with MBO in one of the previous videos, vlogs I should say, since I'm a vlogger now. How much moral worthiness is there in the type of work that you desire to do? And have you contemplated that? Because in the first years, when you're making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, it might seem quite nice, because after all, you can buy your own food and put gas in your tank and pay a mortgage or something. And then after you're making $100,000 or $200,000, all of a sudden you've been able to pay your bills for a long time. Then you got a boat and a Jeep and a camper and some cool stuff, a paramotor, and you're busy in life. And then you ask yourself, is what I'm doing making a difference in this world? Is there a reason for me to feel highly motivated and satisfied with my life? And if the answer is no, that's a choice we made, and that happens to a lot of people. But the real travesty is not asking the question before you launch into your career. The real travesty is for you not to consider what your life is worth. And it's totally acceptable and fine with me, and I think anyone, that you pick a career that pays you well and has great hygiene factors. I'm not saying that we should all be one of these categories of people and make the ultimate sacrifice and be like Mother Teresa or something. I'm not saying that, but part of our career aspirations ought to be that we do something of great value, not just to ourselves, but to the world, because that's where we're going to sense a great deal of value. You can do it as an engineer, you can do it as a dentist, you can do it as anything in the whole world. You just have to perceive it as something that's got intense kind of global value, at least in your eyes. So give that some thought. I think it's worth thinking about. All right, on to the next.